This is a Renegade Media Network podcast.
Finally, the best time of the year has arrived. That would be football season. Don't roll your eyes. You got to quit focusing on the day in and day out craziness that we all focus on. Let your mind relax a little bit. If you love playing fantasy football but struggle to find maybe, the right resource to help you with your research, maybe you keep losing every season, well, I've got you covered. And by that, I mean my sponsors over at Football Insider Edge have you covered. Whether you're a season-long player focused on DraftKings or maybe FanDuel type contests, or if you just like to make the occasional wager each week on a couple of games, make a couple of dollars, the guys at Football Insider Edge provide you with the research tools and the in-depth analysis to take your game to the next level. With their proprietary model, matchup charts, and industry award-winning content, the team at Football Insider Edge have devoted themselves to educating their subscribers, how about that, helping them improve their play, and in a few special moments, which I would like to arrive at one of these moments, winning life-changing money. They are proud of the community they've built through weekly interaction on their Slack chat channel, and take great pride in helping others to achieve their goals of becoming better fantasy players. Check this out. As supporters of this show, which they are, and I guess you could say the Liberty Movement as a whole, these guys are that, they are currently offering a 20% discount on any monthly or full season plan on their website. So, of course, to get that 20% off, you need to type in Counterflow. That is your promo code that I'm giving you guys to get this 20% off over at footballinsideredge.com. Once again, footballinsideredge.com, promo code Counterflow. Do it at checkout. Take advantage of the discount offer today. Let's get to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to another episode of the Counterflow Podcast. Glad to have you back with us once again. I'm glad to be back here in Lockhart, Texas, from Southern California, where I was at the last several days. I'll have to say this, though. Other than LAX, I was not in LA proper, other than, like I'm saying, going to and from the airport. I did not wear a mask once, anywhere. And I'm not saying that because I'm some rebel who breaks the rules, although sometimes that is the case, but it wasn't required anywhere. Now, again, we were in Orange County, so maybe that I realize that's a bit different area politically, so maybe that was part of it, but I went down there thinking, oh, here we go. What's this going to be like? And I have to say, it was not too bad at all, at least in Orange County where I was staying. So I don't know, that was on my mind. Back in Texas now, I will say this, at LAX, in the security line, the one pass line or whatever, where you pay the yearly thing and go through without taking your shoes off, Dee Snider and his girlfriend were right in front of me. For those of you that don't know who that is, he's the singer of the 80s glam metal band Twisted Sister. Looking back on it, I should have said something. As a young kid, that band meant a lot to me. And when I was about 7 or 8, my dad would not let me get the Stay Hungry album. But, I guess I already had that libertarian spirit in me. I somehow attained it anyway. And that was one of the first songs, We're Not Gonna Take It, that I learned to play drums to when I was about 10 years old. So anyway, looking back, I should have said hello or get a picture. Sometimes you feel like when you see someone that famous, you don't want to bother them. So I guess that's the feeling I had at the moment. Anyway, enough rambling from me today because my guest today is fired up. This was an excellent, excellent chat. And I went into it, I didn't know Jason Rink, my guest today, but I assumed, I had seen some trailers of his work, and he came recommended from my producer, Chris, as someone I need to speak with. So I assumed it would be good. But it was even much, much better than I had anticipated. So What a great conversation this is. I think you guys will enjoy it. I'll get right to it. Let me tell you really quickly who Jason Rink is. Jason Rink is an award-winning documentary film producer and director in Austin, Texas. See that? And I've never met him in person. And he's been right near me for quite some time. He's currently working on 2 feature-length documentaries, which got him banned from Facebook and Twitter. One is The Steal, a film about the 2020 election, and the other is Q Sent Me, a film about Jake and Jelly, the Q'Anon Shaman, you know, the guy with the war paint on his face and the buffalo costume, him, and the untold story of January 6th. We're going to get into a lot about what he thought about January 6th. He was there recording, and then he happened to get an in-person interview with this Q shaman the next day on January 7th. His story is fascinating. What Jason witnessed that day, it's nice to finally get someone that can tell you some truths about it. You know, I had Don the Pleb on a few months ago. He was there, and it was nice to get some truth because there's a lot of, obviously, you guys know, media lies about what went on, and all of a sudden those people are domestic terrorists, the enemy. We need Patriot Act number 10 or whatever it would be at this point. So I wanted to get someone who was on the ground there to get his impressions, but we really get into a lot of good talk about politics in general, the MAGA crowd, libertarians, and kind of throw all of that in the conversation for you guys. So let's get to it right now. Jason Rink, glad to have you on, sir. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks so much for having me on. I really love what you're doing and love the slate of guests you've had on, and I'm just honored to be added to that list.
I'm glad to have you. These documentaries that we'll talk about look really good. And when I first learned of probably both of them, it was like kind of in the heat of all of that going on and back in January. And as I've been rewatching the trailers, I'm still just as interested in, you know, because the political cycle moves so fast today. You know, I don't want people to say, what was this stuff about again that Jason Rink's,
Right.
you know, it's like Afghanistan's all the rage right now and the Taliban, and all the Cubans are like, wait, I thought we were all the rage just a few weeks ago.
Right, man. And it feels like an acceleration of the news cycle over the last couple of years, and especially this year. It's just like crazy, the level of developments, how things are shaping up and what's happening. And you know, for people who are sort of like steeped in the political news world, like you and I both probably are, that's one thing. But then people who are just out there trying to live their lives and aren't on top of all this stuff, it's got to just seem like an overwhelming task to try to understand what's happening in the world.
Yes, no kidding. And I've had friends that are somewhat interested say, you know, I'll get into the mood and then I'll listen to some of your shows, and then I start getting stressed and I can't take it. I just want to live a life and let this stuff leave me alone. You're well, we talked before we started recording. You're not in Austin right this moment, but you are based out of Austin, yes?
Yeah, I've been in Austin about 11 years. I'm in Ohio right now. That's where I'm from. I grew up in Ohio. And I really got into the liberty movement in Ohio. I got involved in Ron Paul's 07-08 campaign. And that was just, you know, an incredible time. I was not politically involved prior to that. I ended up starting the, you know, Columbus, Ohio Ron Paul meetup in 2007. And it just blew up, and found myself, you know, one of the grassroots leaders of the entire state. And, you know, that's sort of what got me down this road of, you know, Ron Paul was my, you know, red pill, so to speak, and started to see, you know, all of the things that he had to say about the Federal Reserve, about sound money, about foreign policy, you know, all of the things. And so that's what led me on the journey. And then that journey took me to Austin, Texas back in 2010. And I've been there ever since. And that's really when I moved to Austin, when I started working in media production and producing documentary films.
Okay, so you were not doing film stuff prior to politics.
No, I actually spent 10 years in commercial banking. I was at Chase Bank. I was simultaneously speaking at End the Fed rallies.
Wow.
And then going to work at the bank, you know, and this is right when the bailouts had happened. And so I found myself in this really weird spot of like, I can't do this anymore. Like, this is not the incongruency of what I was doing with my life and what I felt was important in life brought me to a point of decision. And so I decided, I've got to leave corporate America, and a door opened for me to get involved in, run a libertarian education nonprofit down in Austin. And it was through that I decided, I'm going to start using and making video content. And I ended up making my first documentary film, was called Nullification, the Rightful Remedy. I did that with a guy named Michael Bolden out of the 10th Amendment Center and Tom Woods back in, 2011. And so that was my first bootstrapped film. And after that, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. And ended up going to work for a company called Emergent Order, a guy named John Papola, who made the Keynes versus Hayek rap videos.
Yes.
Went to work for them for about 3 to 4 years. And John was my mentor. He taught me, writing, producing, directing. And it was there that I really learned, even deeper about how to create content to try to have an impact, move the needle when it comes to free market economics, when it comes to Austrian economics and liberty.
Are you associated with the Libertarian Christian Institute? It's on some level. I've heard your name associated with them.
Yeah. I met Norman Horn in Austin, Texas, who was really the guy who launched that. And so I was on the founding board of that. I've spoken at some of the events. I used to do the podcast from time to time. And, really don't spend a lot of time involved in the Libertarian Christian Institute now, except, on a board level. But I was a pastor for 3 years. That's another thing that happened in my past, So I, when I became a libertarian, or when I woke up to what Ron Paul was talking about, it was, while I was still a bivocational pastor, and, or just right on the heels of it. And it was his foreign policy message and how that didn't fit in with like what a lot of conservative Christian Republicans believed about that George Bush foreign policy. And I had this moment again. I'm really driven towards when something's incongruent in my life, it really bothers me, And so I would say, why are we sending money or supporting missionaries in like the Middle East, but then or on the other side of the world, but then we're supporting these like bombing campaigns, and what is that all about? So it was those moments of cognitive dissonance that Ron Paul introduced into my life that made me rethink so many things. But I ended up leaving the ministry. Just wasn't the right fit for me. Being a filmmaker is much more aligned, and it's through that I've seen my calling as wanting to create films that have an impact, that reach broader audiences with important ideas. And so that's what I'm up to. But yeah, the Libertarian Christian Institute, really encourage people to check that out as well. I think just doing a lot of great work over there to try to help Christians to understand how libertarianism is really a very consistent political worldview, given what they believe as well.
Yes, I wish you could also help libertarians understand Christianity. It'd be, it's a nice mix to help each side.
Exactly. Yes, 100%. And I definitely have found that in my life, as following Jesus and the libertarian worldview, they match up very perfectly. And I think what we find is there are a lot of people who maybe claim to follow Jesus who are not demonstrating or living out the core principles of Christianity very well, in the same way that people will claim to be libertarians who aren't really living out the core philosophy of libertarianism very well. And those things have an impact on the ability for people who are outside of those belief systems to understand what it's all about. It's many times the followers can become the obstacle to the way.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of us are trying to figure out how can we be less be obstacles to people who are on their journey to understanding human flourishing, freedom, and libertarian ideas and Christian ideas as well.
Are your politics, as we speak right now, would you still consider it based around libertarianism? Because the two documentaries that we're going to discuss, a lot of people are going to go, well, he must be a MAGA guy.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so what I will say is that, in 2016, I voted for Gary Johnson, and, still really believe and adhere to core libertarian principles and in my philosophy. And what ended up happening, I would say, over Trump's administration is a couple of things for me. Number one, I saw something happening in the media and where there was like a demonization and an attacking and a marginalization of Trump and doing things that I was like, wait a minute, this is very, very, slanted. So I saw this media bias that really came out. And one of the things that I recognized that, and something that I agree with Jeff Deist about, who's talked about how Trump actually was a third-party candidate who won as a Republican. And I believe that and to be actually pretty accurate. And what I recognized was that you've got a guy who's got all the money, all the name recognition because of his fame prior to becoming president, who could go and win through a major party, and yet all of the establishment forces could line up to try to destroy him. And again, not defending Trump. Trump's not a libertarian. He doesn't claim to be one, but recognizing that there was something at work that was seeking to try to destroy and marginalize him, make him not effective, and then ultimately remove him. And what I recognized from that, number one, was that if a guy like Trump, with the money and recognition that he had, can't, as an outsider, become president and succeed, then who really can? And for those of us who have been libertarians or even Ron Paul supporters who are like, hey, we want this sort of outsider, a kind of iconoclastic candidate to come in there and stick it to the man. It's like, listen, on one level, it's not really possible. Like, you'll either be destroyed before you can make it happen, or once you get there, there are very powerful forces that are going to align to sideline you so that you can't get a second term or whatever. And so that was one of the things I started to see. The second thing I recognized was that I believed that the things that the right could do that would be a danger to liberty and human flourishing, whatever the worst things are that they could do, they didn't have, or the right doesn't have, the cultural shaping institutions of academia, Hollywood, big tech, regime media, woke corporate, all of these powers that the left has to be able to actually accomplish what they want to do. And so if I were to say, oh, well, the right and the left could both do terrible things and can be terribly authoritarian, if given the opportunity, when it comes to a head-to-head match, there's no actual competition, because it's those cultural shaping forces and institutions that make all the difference. And right now, the right doesn't have any of those. And so that's when I started to see during really the last few years of Trump, and really I didn't decide to vote for Trump, and I did vote for Trump in 2020. I was very hesitant to tell anybody about that, but my vote for Trump in 2020 was simply a vote of self-defense. And it was like, can we buy time? Because what I thought was that if Biden got in, I recognize Biden's just like a figurehead and an establishment guy, and like he's not really pulling the strings, but that all of the forces that would line up and those cultural forces would have their opportunity to accelerate many things that are going to be threatening to us from a standpoint of freedom and liberty in this nation. And so, and I think that has been proven to be true just over the last few months, in my opinion. So to answer the core question is, yes, philosophically, I'm very libertarian. And yet I do share this belief that libertarians don't desire to wield power. And because of that, and because everybody else does, we've got our hands tied behind our back if we can't find a way to actually become powerful in our society in order to defend and preserve liberty. And so I think it's a real problem. It's a real question that we have to wrangle with. So philosophically, I'm libertarian, but practically on the higher stages of political power, once you get beyond local power, I find myself less and less libertarian or voting for libertarians. And I do want to say one last thing is my first film, Nullification, The Rightful Remedy, was all about federalism and the power of states to push back against unconstitutional federal, legislation. And so in my heart, I'm still really like a federalist. At my heart, I'm still like, somebody who I look at what's going on and I say, I think national divorce is potentially on the horizon. And how long are we going to share a government with people who actually hate us and want to destroy us? So I think those are the more important questions, I think, and hopefully that answers that.
It answers a lot, really. And there's a large segment of my audience that's going to really relate with what you just said, because I get emails and little messages and DMs and whatnot on a fairly regular basis. And you just summed up very much the spirit of a lot of the messaging I get from people that listen to this show. So that was really refreshing to hear. It's good to hear that stuff. This ad is for all of the single men and women that listen to Counterflow. I've finally got a dating app that's really worth it, because I've got single friends. They show me these dating apps. There's a bunch of swiping left and swiping right, and then you end up going out with some hardcore leftist that's insane, and the date sucks, and you go nowhere, and it seems to be a giant waste of time. Well, that's why I have for you Drom, D-R-O-M. Above the O is the little umlaut. It's a Swedish word. Drom dating app is a values-based matching app. So if you're libertarian or conservative, if you've got lifestyle that's important to you, religion that's important to you, how to raise your children, if you want to homeschool, all of this stuff, you can now match up with someone who agrees with you. You can set your own deal makers and deal breakers. You could put in there, only show me people that are libertarian who want kids that want to homeschool them, something like that. Drom is a free new values-based dating app. So like I said, you pick the deal breaker, you pick the deal maker, and it will find you like-minded people that care about the same core values. It could be local or anywhere in the world. And check this out, this part's key in my opinion. It's video only. It's video profiles and video chats, no pictures, no texts. This creates a more human type vibe and reduces, let's say, the catfishing. I know some of you people out there have been victim to certain angles when you see a picture and you think, well, this should be a great date. And then you see them in person and it's like, wow, what angles were you fooling me with? This is all video. So there is no fooling. There is no catfishing. If you both like each other's video profiles, then you start video chatting. Once you're both ready to go on the date, Drom actually has a date planner to make the date planning easy. It lets you design your perfect match. There are no experts, match percentages, nothing like that. You pick exactly what you want. You only get those matches. If you don't find a deal breaker or deal maker that's important to you, you can actually add your own if there's not one in the selections they give you. So, guys, girls that listen to Counterflow, this is what you do. Go in your browser and type in drom.date/buck. That's Drom, DROM.date/buck. Click the Apple or Android button and use the invite code BUCK to sign up. And good luck out there. Let me know how this works for you guys. I'm really excited to pitch this product. Let's get back to the show. Let's talk about January 6th, 2021. This is so, I mean, what a moment, what a day. Yeah. I watched it live. Like, I was driving and watching some of the live feed in my car as I drove. I pulled over at one point. I could not believe what was going on. And part of me, and I'll be honest, was like, this is amazing. There's so much to say about it, but you were there. So let me ask you this. Why did you decide to go initially? Yeah, what were you going to cover? And then we'll get some thoughts past that.
Yeah, so it's really pretty crazy. What happened after the November 3rd election happened. I watched the live results happening, like a political junkie that I am, and saw what was happening there. And, I got to admit, before the night was over and the next morning, I started to have, questions about the election. And I was definitely not somebody who I was like, certain what was going on or anything was going on. But I was curious. I was like, yeah, there's some anomalies happening here. And so as I started to pay attention to what was happening in the very aftermath, what I saw was I saw what was happening, or what was beginning to happen, in this populist uprising through the Stop the Steal movement of the MAGA folks who were like, wow, we're going to have a big march in DC. And it was like, that first march that happened was like, I don't know, a week and a half after Election Day. And for me, I was just paying attention to what was going on. And I was like, man, this has got some Tea Party vibes going on right now. And, coming out of the 2008 Ron Paul campaign, I ended up getting involved in Tea Party stuff right after that. And one thing that I realized about the Tea Party early on was that it was quickly overtaken by establishment GOP folks who leveraged that to just kind of build their own empires and position themselves as these small government Republicans. And though there were some nice things that happened as a result, Rand Paul and Thomas Massie and Justin Amash found themselves getting into to Congress. Overall, the Tea Party was not Ron Paul 2.0 or anything. It was a big disappointment. And so what I noticed about the MAGA thing was that there was a more distinctly anti-establishment, against the deep state vibe. It was almost like they're inoculated against some of the things that I think really injured the Tea Party movement from being something that could have been really a lot more effective. And so that really intrigued me. And so what I ended up doing was I simply, through Twitter, before I was deplatformed off of there, got connected with Ali Alexander, who was one of the guys with the Stop the Steal movement, didn't know him. Cut just a quick video for him, sent it to him, and said, he responded. And I said, hey, listen, I just want to put a documentary crew together and follow you guys around the country a little bit. Like, I'm interested in what's going on. So he was like, okay. So we kind of met him. He found out, that I was like not some guy trying to paint a terrible picture. I was actually trying to figure out, what's this all about? And so what I ended up doing was me and one of my filmmaking partners, along with some other people, ended up spending like the next 10 weeks on the road, going to Georgia and Arizona and DC and Florida, and interviewed, documented everything that was going on at these Stop the Steal rallies. And, I saw pretty quickly that, yeah, these folks were MAGA. Yeah, they really, a lot of them very into Donald Trump. Yeah, there was QAnon people throughout there who believed there was going to be some sort of like secret reveal that was going to put Trump in the presidency. But what I also noticed was I was like, oh, wow, there's this guy, Brandon Straka, with this organization, Walk Away, which was like 500,000 Democrats who voted for Trump. And I was like, oh, wow, there's a diversity of beliefs and people. And this was a much more diverse and educated and interesting and inviting group of people. And also, I want to say that, you got to put in context where we're in COVID, lockdowns were still happening a lot of places. People hadn't been gathering in church. People hadn't been socially gathering. And, I felt like a lot of people, the thousands and thousands of people in these different cities that were coming out to these Stop the Steal rallies, were really building and thriving on like-minded community that had been taken away from many people during COVID. And so there was just a lot happening in that movement. And so what happened was, in Arizona, we had seen this guy with the horns and the face paint, just like at a couple of these rallies. And then we were in DC at an event in December, and he was dressed differently, but his name's Jake Angeli, the Buffalo Man. He was beating a drum in front of the Supreme Court and like chanting to the Supreme Court. And we were like, let's just interview this guy. This was in December. And so we sat him down and interviewed him for like 20 or 25 minutes, found out his story, and didn't really think that much of it. But then when the 6th came around, because we were following the Stop the Steal movement, the Trump event, and then to go march on the Capitol, that was all part of it, to sort of get the Republican congressmen or any Congress people, but mostly Republican, to sort of object to the electoral certification. That was the mission of January 6th. It's what the Stop the Steal movement was working towards for many, many weeks prior to that, was just to get those Congress people to object. And they had already had many who agreed to. And so we were there on the 6th to cover that, to film more what was going on. In fact, I had a team that was setting up a stage just near the Capitol where speeches were going to be given all throughout the day. It was just a small stage, probably 50 yards from the Capitol, maybe. And so that's why I was there on the 6th. Well, I actually walked over. I was at Trump's speech at the Ellipse. We were filming there. And then before his speech was over, I walked over to the Capitol because I was trying to make sure that the team was set up at the stage over there. And when I got to the reflecting pool side of the Capitol, I was right there when some of the first people jumped over the barricades because it was just so early. And so I filmed a little bit of that just with my iPhone. And I just remember looking around and saying, wow, there are almost no security on the lawn. And these barricades can be just knocked over. They were just metal fences that are just sort of connected together. And so, and then I looked behind me and there was like waves of hundreds and hundreds of other people that were coming this way. And I knew that thousands, tens of thousands. I mean, there was at least 500,000 people there. I don't know what the number was, but it was massive. And I recognized at that moment, I was like, this is going to get kind of out of hand pretty quick because people are going to be on the Capitol steps. There's no doubt. There just was not any security. And so I ended up staying outside. I went over to this stage and sort of was watching what was unfolding from close, but not right there. And it was not too long after that one of my buddies who was at a hotel in the area texted me a picture. My filmmaking partner, he was offloading some footage, and he sent me a picture, and it was the Q Shaman. It was Jacob Chansley is also another name he goes by. And he sent me this text, and he's like, hey man, Jake is in the Senate. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And so, long story short is we knew him. We had talked to him and we had a cell phone number. So we were just like, okay. A couple hours later, we texted him and asked him if he'd want to sit down and do an interview with us. And lo and behold, he agreed to. And we sat down with him on the morning of January 7th for a little over an hour in our hotel room, asked him about the whole thing. And, he told us his whole story. And within 48 hours later, he was arrested, in custody, and he has not been released since. And so we quickly found ourselves really with two films on our hands. We had the film we were making from November, all about the election. But then this January 6th moment happened, and we found ourselves with the only exclusive interview with like sort of the icon of the day. Mm-hmm. And we said, maybe there's a whole movie to make here about January 6th. And obviously a lot of things have unfolded since then, but that's the whole story on why I was there, why we were filming, and sort of what's unfolded since then.
What was the feeling when you said you looked around, there's not a lot of security, and you knew that there would be a lot of people coming? Did you feel like, I should get out of here, I'm going to get trampled? Did it feel dangerous? Because as we all know, since then, it's been painted like AOC was praying and crying, right, and these people were scared, supposedly fearing for their lives. And then you see videos, some of them look a little rambunctious, then a lot of them look kind of quite peaceful, to be honest with you. Actual peaceful protesters that we heard about the previous year all summer. What were your feelings just being surrounded and immersed in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely was a fog of war dimension to it. Like, you couldn't take in the whole scene from any one perspective because the property was so big. There's so many things happening on different sides. What I can tell you from my perspective, and again, I was maybe 50 yards from the Capitol like the whole day, the whole time. And, the filmmaker in me wanted to go right inside. The husband and father and guy who didn't want to go to jail was like, nah, I'm going to stay on the outside. And, that turned out to be a good choice for me. But what was interesting was there was about a 2-hour time window where I could have absolutely just gone onto the Capitol for sure. And I don't know about getting in, but for a while, it really was just a lot of people kind of hanging out on scaffoldings and stairs and cheering and chanting. And it felt kind of like, the quote unquote insurrection as scripted by National Lampoon's Animal House. Like, It sort of was like MAGA bros, and like there was like the Nick Fuentes America First crowd, like that are really like a lot of online trolls. And then there was a lot of people in their like 50s, and then, you had definitely some like kind of LARPers in like camo and gear, looking like they're ready to, scuffle. And so there was quite a mix. And I remember that day though, like, I never felt in any danger whatsoever. I mean, and I didn't really witness anything that to me looked like violence. There was definitely a time though when riot squads were marched in. I saw that happen just when they started to get there. And once that started to occur, there was definitely conflict that happened between the DC police and between people who were there. And so, immediately the questions of like infiltration or, like Antifa or whatever, feds, all of that stuff was stuff that people started to talk about or think about immediately. And I think that, people need to be real. Whenever you get a decent number of people together, whether it is Antifa or whether it is MAGA or whether it's libertarians or Ron Paulers or whatever, you've always got to recognize that there might be infiltrators in there, that there might be feds in there, because everything that many of these groups are doing, to the degree that they're actually organic and animated by ideas like, freedom and liberty or whatever, you've got to assume that there's people in there that are going to be trying to derail those groups and organizations. Yeah. So, I do think that's true. But I also think that at the core of January 6th and the people who were there and what they were thinking and feeling, if you put yourself in the shoes of people who firmly believe that the election was stolen, that there was aspects of fraud, whether it was, rules were changed unconstitutionally at the state level, whether drop boxes were illegal, whether signature verification was not done, whether a bunch of crazy stuff happened with Dominion voting machines, whatever the belief is, if you really believe that the election was stolen and that you couldn't get any judge or courtroom to actually listen to you, you couldn't get the media to report on it, that you were being silenced and marginalized at every turn, then what you've got to see January 6th as primarily is 1 million people coming to see Donald Trump, their guy, come speak for the last time as president, and also wanting Congress to know that they don't believe the election was legitimate and wanting them to decertify it or kick it back to Mike Pence or whatever the quote unquote constitutional solution that was. So, just a frustration of people who actually want to follow the Constitution in their perspective. Again, you don't have to agree with that, but just putting yourself in their shoes. I think it's people who are upset that they didn't have any legal mechanism to try to make sure that the election was fair. And so that is the underlying belief. And then on top of that, I think there was a feeling of patriotism as defined by like founding fathers, constitutional, flying the flag, red, white, and blue, patriotism as well. But violence and danger, not there by any vast amount, and really overall mostly peaceful and patriotic in my observation of that.
Did you see a lot of weapons?
Oh no. And like DC is number one, if you wanted to get into aspects of Trump's speech, and there was a lot of people who got in to the area for Trump's speech, and a lot of people absolutely wanted to get in there, even if they couldn't have. You had to go through all sorts of security. You couldn't even bring in like big cameras and stuff. And so I think most people who go into DC understand that like you can't bring guns in that place and you can't have them on the premises. So I didn't see any weapons, didn't see any guns. And in fact, when you look at the 550 people roughly that have been arrested and charged for anything, I don't think there's a single weapons charge. If there's a weapons charge, it's like a guy had a hunting knife on him or whatever. So, But I don't think there's a single gun charge in it. Didn't see any of that at all. And I think overall it wasn't there, you know.
Did you understand what had happened to Ashley Babbitt as it happened? Was there murmurs about, oh my God, this girl on our side was just shot and killed by a cop? How did that news break? Were you aware of it, and how long did that take to kind of get around?
Well, one thing people need to recognize is if you were there and if you were in a decent perimeter around the Capitol, it was almost impossible to have cell phone or send any text messages or anything. The network was just so jammed. So it was just sporadically, you might find out something that was going on. At least that was the experience that I had, and many, many people that I talked to. We had trouble communicating with our camera team. We had several guys out there, guys that got tear gassed and whatnot. And it's like, we didn't talk to those guys till a long time after. In fact, one of the only reasons I was able to get any messages in was because one of my guys was sitting in a hotel room a little bit away. And so he was relaying some things to me, and they would sporadically come through. So I did not hear about the Ashley Babbitt situation until a few hours later. It was later in the evening, as far as I could tell, or if I heard any murmurings about it, didn't know what the details were. And so many people, I think, who were not there actually got some of the news of what was happening, you know, a little bit quicker than some of us who the cell phone network was jammed up and we couldn't get those updates.
Let me tell you guys about your one-stop shop for all things CBD related, and that would be PalomaVerdeCBD.com. That is PalomaVerdeCBD.com, where naturally they are a sponsor of this show. So there's a promo code, which is BUCK, B-U-C-K. If you use that over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com, you will get 25% off of your order. Everything over $75, that is. So that's the stuff I got to tell you up top. Now, I want to tell you, other than supporting this show, which I'm assuming you'd like to do, I'll tell you some other reasons why you should shop there. For one, they opened a brick and mortar store right before the government lockdowns happened, which basically wiped that part out. So they're online only now. So you got to feel for anyone that was a victim of government overreach, like the lockdowns, and that's what these guys were. But they're a really wonderful couple. They're very good people, very like-minded into this kind of same stuff, the weird stuff that we're all into. I can tell you that Carlos and Vanessa out of San Antonio are truly good people, and they're really hard workers. They put a lot into this business. There's a lot of personal touches, so that ought to entice you guys as well. I can tell you about some of the products. They've got the mint CBD tinctures. They've got all the CBD stuff. If you're thinking, do they have this? Yeah, they probably do. They've got CBD soft gels, CBD gummies. They've got the tinctures. Like I said, they've got salve stick. There's a sleep bundle to help you sleep with several things in that. They've got salve, and I bragged about this a lot, but I genuinely mean it. The CBD Cool Menthol Sports Cream is the best sports cream I've ever used. And I am not saying that just because they're sponsors. I actually mean it. Also, the pet treats, the dog chews. Guess who loves the dog chews? That would be Lux, my French bulldog. If you know anything about the French bulldog breed, once they're about 10 years old, they kind of limp around a little bit slower than they used to. Well, that was my dog, basically, up until I started giving him these dog chews and putting the pet CBD tinctures on his food every morning. And now he thinks he's like 2 years old again, which would be 14 years old, I guess, in dog years. But yeah, so he thinks he's a teenager. Anyway, I love that he loves that. And I love that these guys are sponsors. Like I said, they're great people. They want to help support this show, as do you. So, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K at checkout, get you 25% off of everything over $75. Please give them a visit. It helps them, it helps me, and it helps my dog. What more could you ask for? Let's get back to the show. Let's talk about the Buffalo Shaman guy. I keep forgetting his name. I know he goes by two different names apparently.
Yeah.
Kind of your vibe you receive from him. I've seen clips to where I think Alex Jones not only yelled at him when they were on a phone call or something, but accused him of possibly being an actor.
Yep.
Let's just get into what this guy was about, because I think it's fascinating. You got to sit down and chat with him, and how much of his his stuff does he actually fully believe in? All of the stuff that you kind of got from him.
Yeah. So I would encourage anybody who wants to go check out the latest and greatest trailer. It's at the website qsentmemovie.com, qsentmemovie.com. And you can sign up there for updates about the film. So what I will say is that we had known from our original time we'd spent with Jake in December, and his name is, again, Jake Angeli, also known as Jacob Chansley. And so he is from Arizona. We had known that he was a QAnon guy. And let me give your folks just a quick summary as to how I would classify QAnon.
Yes,
QAnon is sort of like the buffet, the Golden Corral buffet of conspiracy theories. It's sort of like the granddaddy of all conspiracy theories. And when I say conspiracy theory, I am not insinuating that there aren't things that are believed within this massive, granddaddy of conspiracy theories that isn't true. Like, no, there's a lot of stuff that is true from the standpoint of like things that are not conspiracies, but are thought to be conspiracies, So it's like when it talks about the globalist takeover of the United States, for example, like there's a lot of things that we can look at and say, yeah, there seems to be a globalist takeover of the United States happening. Mm-hmm. And it's not really a conspiracy, right? But, all of the things that you would have maybe heard on a typical Alex Jones podcast over the last, 10 years, many of those things are there, right? So it's like, oh yeah, there's a little bit of Pizzagate. There's a little bit of, why the borders are being opened up to like, destroy America. There's a little bit of like, 9/11 truth. There's a little bit of, so yeah, it's like, it's got all of that. But the other thing that's going on that was happening with QAnon, and I'm not an expert on QAnon by any stretch, but I've had to get to know a bit about it as I've been doing this project. There was also this dimension of QAnon that there were these good guys with access inside the Trump administration or sort of inside the deep state that were like giving out information about why, Trump was actually kind of letting things play out in a particular way. And there was going to be this secret information and these arrests that were going to happen that was going to, take the whole thing down. So the thing that sets QAnon apart was, yeah, there's this sort of salad bar beliefs of, conspiracies, and then it's disseminated through like a decentralized online cult, essentially online, where then scriptures almost are like sort of dished out along the way about what's going to happen. And people in the Q, community would go research and connect all the dots, and be like, oh yeah, this is what this means. And so that was happening. And so people who believed in the QAnon theory, many of them, and including Jake, we sat down with Jake on the 7th. Okay, now we just watched what happened on the 6th happen. Most people in the United States watched the 6th and they were like, listen, I don't know what's going to happen, but I can tell you right now, Trump is not going to be sworn in as the next president. Like it was off the table at that point. Anybody who is rational. Yet we asked Jake on the 7th, did he still believe that Trump was going to be inaugurated? And he still believed it. There were many people in Q. There's people in Q who still believe it right now. Like Trump's coming back. He's going to be reinstated. I think many of the people who, frankly, are kind of in the Mike Lindell quadrant of what's happening still think that's going to happen. And so you got to understand that QAnon kind of animated many of the things that Jake was doing, but also what he was doing was he was using his costumes and his sort of eccentric behavior and the Q sent me messaging to try to drive people sort of down the rabbit hole, so to speak. So in a lot of ways, Jake saw this as an effective means of getting people's attention. And he was doing this for months and months and months prior to January 6th. And he saw what he was doing as kind of a guy who could get people's attention and then try to open their minds up or red pill people to what's really happening with the government. And, many of Jake's core beliefs about the U.S. government, like a standard libertarian would believe it. You know, it's like he's talking and I'm like, oh yeah, check. Oh yeah, check.
Yeah.
Check. You know, or even sort of your typical constitutional conservative all the way down the line. And so the other thing that was really interesting about Jake when we talked to him, you know, and again, then we ended up, after he was arrested, we interviewed a number of his family members. We've talked to him many times from jail since this happened. And so, you know, what was really interesting about Jake was he's a pacifist at heart. So people told us that he would catch flies and release them. He talked about how, you know, Gandhi and MLK, he's very well read on civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance. He's very articulate. Like he is, you know, the guy is astute. And when you listen to him and when the film comes out, people are going to be kind of shocked. Like, oh, wow, this guy actually can articulate himself well. He knows what he's talking about. And a lot of the things he's talking about are accurate. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, that was one thing that is really striking about him. The other thing that's very striking about our interview with Jake is that we're talking to him at 10 a.m. on January 7th, and he tells us exactly what happens. He talks about how he was let in the door, how he led a prayer in the Senate, how when he was asked to leave, he left. You know, he was giving us all these things that, like, we didn't have any evidence that was true at that point. Like, none of the video footage had gotten out at that point. And so we're like, okay, cool story, right? Well, then what ended up happening is we start getting this footage coming out. And what's going on? People are being let in. Like, there's people sort of milling around inside the Capitol, and the cops are just standing there. And yes, we see Jake leading a prayer in which he actually reverently takes his helmet off to lead it. You know, it's just sort of interesting. And it's like, yes, he did leave a note for Mike Pence that said, it's only a matter of time. Justice is coming. And, you know, so like he told us all these things happened. We had no evidence. But what's happened is all of the evidence that's come out has only confirmed what Jake's told us the whole time. So his story didn't change. And from the jump, his story has been sort of like supported by all of the footage that's come out. And the other thing that I would say that struck us about Jake was that he absolutely believed that he did nothing wrong. He believed that the Capitol was the people's house, that our tax dollars pay for it, that it's our right to be able to go and, you know, talk to our representatives about our grievances. And he didn't think he was going to be in any trouble whatsoever, to the point that he voluntarily called the FBI without a lawyer. He set up an appointment with them and went in to meet them. And in fact, in the backseat of his car, when he went to that appointment with the FBI, was his costume, because he was going to go from that appointment to go protest at the Arizona Capitol. Like, he was that clueless, naive, or, you know, righteous in his own cause, that he didn't recognize he would be potentially in solitary confinement for now 7 months with no bail, facing like 26 years in prison.
There's almost like it sounds like there's some kind of like a sweet demeanor and like just a vibe of being kind and at the same time extremely naive and unaware of some of how you know, it's funny that he's aware of what he thinks are these conspiracies, which would be done by, you know, really bad actors.
Right.
Yet, as he wants to turn himself into the FBI, which you should realize is run by bad actors, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and you know, let me just tell you, one of the things I think is really great that's happening in America right now is the credibility of the U.S. government, the intelligence community, the media, all of that taking a massive hit in the minds of a lot of people who previously didn't see it, right? And so there's many of us who've been listening to Ron Paul for, you know, decades, who are like not surprised that right now we're finding out that like basically the Afghan government and military was a big grift and a lie. Like, it was going to collapse no matter what, that we were being lied to by the Pentagon and intelligence people and the government all these years. We're not surprised. Like we totally knew it. And it's like, but there's a lot of people that are surprised. They're getting their eyes open. Well, same thing's happening with the January 6th narrative right now. See, from the jump, January 6th had to be as bad as 9/11 or the Civil War combined. It had to be that bad, and because there's an agenda that they want out of it, which is Patriot Act 2.0, which is, to turn us, people who love freedom and liberty, not just MAGA people, by the way, people who respect individual rights, property rights, to turn us into domestic terrorists. And so the January 6th narrative is crucial. It's got to remain. And so this is one of the reasons why I believe that, a week after the 6th, when I posted a movie trailer for this film on Facebook and Twitter and on YouTube, that I was then permanently suspended from Twitter and Facebook as a result within 12 hours. And YouTube took the video down because we were, even in that moment, sort of showing a chink in the armor of the narrative, because Jake was kind of an articulate, likable guy that anybody who'd watch it would be like, okay, listen, made a mistake, probably shouldn't have been there, didn't use good judgment, but not dangerous. Let's be clear about that. Most people are going to get that impression. And it's like, he's got to be turned into Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
And in fact, when we started to pitch this film to the big platforms, because we recognized that this is a film that has massive potential as like, it meets the Netflix scroll test, right? Like, even if you're not into politics, you see that guy in a movie about that guy on January 6th on Netflix, a lot of people are going to watch it. Yeah. Well, those people said they were offended that we would pitch this film to them because that's like Osama bin Laden getting a platform on there. So immediately we recognized that our films were probably not going to see the light of day through traditional means because of the narratives around both the Stop the Steal election movement and around January 6th. And so that's when I got my huge wake-up call as a guy who only had a few thousand followers on Twitter and Facebook that was making a movie. And I'm like, hold it. I didn't just get a warning. They weren't like, oh, take that post down. They're like, no, you're gone. You cannot be on these platforms because you posted a movie trailer. And, that was a wake-up call to me. I recognized that this was happening. I recognized that big tech was, starting to act like an arm of the national security state. But when I found myself in the crosshairs, I recognized, oh man, this is a real big problem. And so ever since then, though we've been finishing these films and we're deep in post-production on it, the problem for us has been, number one, putting money together to finish them because we can't guarantee distribution at this point that's going to be profitable. And number two, I can't get the word out because, I still have very limited reach on social, given what's happened to me.
Did Twitter ban you at that moment when you posted that?
Yeah, so I've had 2 accounts shut down on Twitter. I had my own personal account that I had about 3,000 followers on at that point, that I was permanently suspended. And I've been shut down to try to do an end run around it. I do have an account on there right now, with like 49 followers, but it's a brand new account. Sure. I continue to want to engage there. But then also we had an account for the movie, The Steal, our election film. And that account was recently removed. It was right when we hit 1,000 followers. They got rid of it. And so it had evaded capture. So, for all intents and purposes, I'm banned off of Twitter personally. Like, I can't get another account. Facebook is absolutely the same. I can't get an account there. I do have an account on Facebook right now, but I'm very cautious about who's a part of that. And I think it's going to get taken down again because I'm moving through the world like I got nothing to lose now. Like, I'm using these platforms now to just try to get the word out about things that I think are very, very important. And this is one of them. And again, it's one of the things that I think libertarians are being, let me just say this. There's a few things that I think libertarians are being completely idiotic about right now. Number one, it is election integrity. Now, I know everybody hates Donald Trump as a libertarian, or a lot of them do. And that's fine. That's great. But we're talking about a party that only gets 1% to 2% of the vote in national elections to begin with. And so I want people to recognize, hey, listen, the establishment, the permanent political class, just sees that as like a slush fund of votes that they can pillage and like shove to other candidates to begin with. And there might be people on this podcast who don't think that the elections are sketchy, that they don't think they're fraudulent enough to make a difference. I want to remind you that the vote count that separates Biden and Trump was only like 40 or 50,000 across the states that matter, okay, that decided it. And because of COVID, things were loosened around elections that were unprecedented, never been done in the past. So, when it was previously okay for Stacey Abrams to talk about why she didn't become governor because of 50,000 votes in Georgia, it's like, that was before COVID, guys. And it's like, so you've got to recognize that if we're going to be free, we got to have voice and exit. If we don't have those things, we are slaves. And so I think people who are libertarians need to really recognize, listen, this isn't about Trump. This is about whether or not the permanent political class and the regime media wants to make sure that only people take positions of power that are going to play along. Number one. Number two, when it comes to this idea of exit, the idea of us being able to travel and go places that we want to go, we've just come out of 18 months of seeing that our government and the regime media is committed to locking us down. And though this may have been a trial run, look, there's a congressman introduced a bill to try to get vaccine passports, I believe, mandatory vaccinations to travel on planes between states. And so voice and exit is critical for us to be free people. And so I think the election is an important thing for people to pay attention to as libertarians. I also think this idea of big tech not being a private company.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. There are current lawsuits, current court cases with documents that prove that federal government and local governments had specific private portals to communicate with Twitter to get people removed and get posts shut down. So we're way beyond that argument anymore.
Yes.
It is big tech companies are operating as extensions of the national security state. That changes this discussion. And so, we've really got to look at that. And I know you've had some great guests on to talk about that.
Yeah, I find that at risk of sounding like a conservative old boomer, it's just, I can't get past this obvious, strange thing about how if you were an 18-year-old female putting her OnlyFans link with actual clips from it on Twitter, you're good. You put a professionally made documentary trailer just about the election, you're gone.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And, in the case of the Q Sent Me movie, and, we've had stuff, we have a trailer, we've got a website called thesteal.com. You can go there for the latest trailer of that. And that film is directed a little bit more towards the MAGA, movement. And again, I'm a filmmaker. I want to make films on important ideas. I also want to make money off of them. Like, this is how we finance everything that we do. And so we take into consideration things like audience. So, I'm not necessarily a libertarian making films for libertarians, guys. I'm out there trying to actually take and make films that I can put seeds that will move the needle in the minds of people who aren't listening to the Scott Horton podcast, which everybody should, or the Tom Woods podcast, which everybody should. But it's like, no, I'm trying to actually get out there onto the bigger platforms and trying to have things that are going to pierce through. And hopefully, there's a lot of MAGA people that are waking up to a lot of this stuff. And I know it's a temptation for us to be like, oh, we told you so. We've been talking about this for 15 years. No, what we should do is be like, yes, come in. The water's fine, guys.
Yes.
Let's talk about how can we work together to make a more free society at the local and state level, by the way, that we can maybe really stand for these things. And by the way, you're not my enemy.
Right.
Yeah, we got some disagreements, but I don't want to put you in a gulag. Let me tell you, that's not the truth about the other side. Yep. Guys, the people want to shut us down, our voices down. They don't want to share a country or a government with us. And so, I don't want to be this alarmist guy, but it's just like, wake up. recognize that libertarian ideas and the non-aggression principle and believing it isn't enough. And that to a certain degree, the non-aggression principle is being by default violated upon us when we wake up every day. Like, we're far beyond that. So while I adhere to the non-aggression principle against my fellow man, and by the way, I only support, nonviolent means, to try to move things along, like to the degree that we are having aggression put on us, and to the degree that we see things happening where people want to try to take our life and our liberty away from us, we've got to figure out, what does that mean? What do we do next? And that's an important conversation.
Yes, I can't really follow that up. Everything you just said it's so beautifully put. And my friend Tho Bishop has often said lately, your average Trump voter is much more red-pilled and radical than your average Libertarian Party member.
Yeah, Tho's another guy that I really agree with a lot of the takes he's had lately. There's some of us who, again, have been around Mises for a long time, been around the Ron Paul movement for a long time, who found ourselves sort of coming into this Trump world a little bit. Yes. And it felt really weird. I got to tell you, it still kind of feels weird. And again, people can be like, they can try to take us down or criticize us like we don't have the street cred. It's like, guys, look, I think I got the street cred. I think those got the street cred as far as libertarian credentials. And it's like, we just see a strategic problem that isn't being addressed over here. And that we're saying, listen, are we serious about trying to have liberty in our lifetime? Are we serious about trying to see the greatest amount of freedom for the greatest amount of people in our lifetime? If the answer is yes, then we need to look at all of the strategy, all of the options on the table, and we've got to take a hard look at things that maybe previously people just thought were true, and be like, listen, guys, we're not in Kansas anymore. The playing field is not the same, and we are in conflict right now. There's a war happening around us. What do we do?
Yes, well put. Where can I guess let's give your deep platform on certain sites, but let's give my listeners any place, anywhere online they can find not only these two documentaries we're talking about, anything that you'd like to plug, really.
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me probably is go to either thesteel.com. You can sign up for updates on the film there, and that's a great way to just get your email to me and say, hey, listen, man, love what you're up to. Let's connect. And then that way I can find you. Also, Q Sent Me, that's QSENT movie.com. That's on the other film we're doing. Again, you can sign up there for updates. And then you will find me on Telegram. You will find me on Signal. My handle is Jason Rink, RINK, on many places. And where that is not my handle because it's been removed, you might find me on some of the other platforms under another handle, but you'll find me out there. I also have a website, jasonrink.com. And that's really more of my commercial filmmaking website, because I have a whole production company and business that, we make money for companies that make money. And so that's what I do to survive and pay the bills and keep all my employees paid. But, I welcome anybody to reach out to me, man. I love to talk about these ideas. I've been, ever since Ron Paul turned me on to them, I've never gotten turned off. What I would encourage people to do, and what I saw in my own life, was I said, listen, I need to have my money. I have to have money freedom, job freedom, relationship freedom. My relationships with my family and my friends have got to work. I've got to have liberty and all that stuff. That solves 80% of my life. I got so caught up in politics that I didn't realize most of my everyday slavery comes because I'm not addressing those things. So I say, get those right in your life. And if you're interested in how to do that, talk to me. I love to talk to people about that. And then find out how we can link up together and just talk about the ideas. We're at a critical moment right now where, many things are happening and people are rethinking things that they thought were true. We've got a great opportunity to shift the conversation and to shift people's minds. And it's going to take everybody who writes podcasts, makes movies, gives speeches, doing all of these things, and then just supporting people who are creators through money and through audience and through sharing to make this happen. But I'm very optimistic right now. I think there's an opportunity for things to open up and really for liberty to become a reality. But I do think that some of us just really need to rethink some things. And, again, would love to be in that conversation. I really appreciate you getting me on here today.
Thank you so much, Jason Rink. This is, it's been really good. Thank you so much, sir.
Appreciate it, man.
Yes. I told you guys that was going to be a good discussion, and I really had a good time talking with Jason. As for this show, let's see, go to the YouTube page, subscribe to the YouTube page. I'm going to keep pushing it because for too long, I did not, and I'm playing catch up with it. See, I'll be doing a live stream or two very soon, so if you subscribe, you'll get notified. Live streams, like I've told you before, only will be on YouTube. They will not be in the podcast feed. So pay attention to that stuff on the YouTube channel, Counterflow with Buck Johnson. The webpage, counterflowpodcast.com. It's got all my social media links. It's got the t-shirts. And then, of course, like I always tell you, the Telegram group. I'm in it every day. Try to do it several times a day if my schedule allows, and chat back and forth with you guys in there. And a lot of brilliant people in that group sharing some really good articles and some funny memes too, of course. As for this show, I think we're about done. I will see you guys next week. Have a good one.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.
This has been the Counterflow Podcast, a part of the Renegade Media Network.